Hey guys, it's Agnes. So I'm in some pretty intense lighting just now. I've had, I don't know what I'm doing with my hands just now. Everything is what I'm doing with my hands. I've had some major lighting issues. They're not major, I'm being dramatic. I've had some lighting issues. The light that I have, I'm not super happy with. So I've been mostly filming my videos by the window, like in daylight, but it's 4 p.m. and I had literally no choice but to do this. So I hope the lighting's okay. And I hope that by the time I finish editing this video, I haven't had to make myself like a really weird color to make the lighting look better. Anyway, we're here. This video is going to be more of like, I don't know, I guess sort of a story time kind of video. I'm going to be talking about my mental health, why I left psychiatric nursing, and and how I ended up in Denmark, because they're all kind of one and the same story. Also, the light that I have is fitted in above my camera. It's a whole tripod story. Literally nobody's interested in that stuff apart from me, but it means that I can't see on my screen where it says recording. So if you see me do this, it's because I have to check I'm still recording, because I am not sitting here for 10 minutes like talking to myself into a camera that's not even recording. That's too sad, okay? So my setup is a little bit strange, but you know, deal with it because I have to. So my mental health. My mental health. So I'm going to start from when I was a very, very young girl. No, I mean, this isn't going to be a really, really long story, but I am actually going to start from that far back. So I don't know if you guys knew, but it is pretty common within the mental health sector for a lot of the members of staff to have had their own mental health issues, or to have their own mental health issues that are ongoing. I think it's one of the things that makes us really good at our job. I think especially when you have a medical professional who's experienced things from like the other side, who've experienced maybe depression, anxiety from a personal point of view. Now, there are some diagnoses where that theory in my mind doesn't stretch to. I'm not going to list them, but just so you know, I don't think that everyone who's a professional should have also experienced the personal side of whatever they're treating. Eating disorders are one of them. Like, they are it's an especially insidious disorder that even once you've kind of recovered, you're only ever really in remission. So I don't know that it's recommended to work in that sector if you've experienced that personally. I suspect it's probably not recommended. So there is a caveat to that rule. But a lot of people who work in mental health have also had their own struggles. So when I was a teenager, I received some input from a psychologist for various things. And from there, I was super interested in helping people with their mental health. I just thought it was absolutely fascinating, the whole experience. And I really, really had a strong desire to give back. So I went to college and did my nursing degree. I went to nursing and became a psychiatric nurse. So I have lived with chronic anxiety. And I think as I got older, I also started to notice a real pattern of my mood dipping quite significantly low. I think as a result of my anxiety, the two seem to be really, really linked. It's like when I'm very, very anxious about something, my anxiety builds to a sort of crescendo, a climax of anxiety, if you will, and really like the only way for my nervous system to move on from that is to like plummet down. And my experience of low mood, like I can feel it coming on. Just checking I'm recording still. I can feel it coming on like a sort of deep, deep tiredness. It almost feels like a kind of hormonal change. That's how not in control of it I am. Like it's like a dark cloud just settles and a tiredness just to my bones, like an emotional exhaustion. So last year I found myself, I was working in a job that I loved, but it was a job that was emotionally really, really intensive. I loved all the service users I was working with, the kind of work I was doing. I was in the community in the Scottish Highlands. I was working in one of the most beautiful parts of Scotland, in quite an affluent middle class area. So there wasn't like a load of poverty. There was some drug use, but not a lot. And if you've worked in the mental health sector, you know what difference that makes. If you're working in a really kind of impoverished area, then you will probably see a lot of the kind of result of a lot of like broken families, the result of a lot of substance addiction. Sorry, I got super distracted by a noise on my laptop. You will see just a lot of that kind of thing. A lot of the illnesses that relate to poverty, but when you work in a more middle class area, you're kind of seeing more anxiety, depression, postpartum depression, occasionally some like bipolar and schizophrenia. But mostly the people you're working with are like depressed and anxious. And I actually loved that kind of work. But one of the downsides of that job, although I had a lot of professional autonomy, you never knew when you were going into the office and maybe finding something like massive had happened overnight that then you would be left dealing with. So I think the uncertainty of that job, it did kind of create, over quite a bit of time, it created quite a lot of anxiety in me, just not knowing what you were going to go in and find. And your schedule could change like that because there was some kind of emergency in the community that needed to be dealt with. Last year, I was moving house. Which was a really positive thing. But as you guys know, it's also a very, very stressful thing to have happen. We were meant to have moved in like a long, long, long time before, but the move got delayed, which meant that the move was happening at the same time that a lot of other things were happening in my life. Again, kind of creating a lot of stress. Some of these things I sort of had a choice over, but some of them I've like chosen the timing of, and then there were some other things happening around it that I hadn't chose the timing of. At the time, I had taken on this huge kind of DIY project. It was essentially doing kind of light renovations to a property entirely alone, which I realize sounds just absolutely nuts to take on that kind of project. But it was the sort of thing that I wanted to do it. And then I hadn't realized that it was going to come about at the same time as a lot of other stuff. And then by the time I'd sort of said I would do it, it really needed done. So I kind of had no choice but to go on and do it, if that makes any sense. So what was happening is when I would get home from work at like 8 p.m., I would then change clothes and I would start painting this flat that I was renovating. And at the time, I could not see a way out. All of these things kind of had to happen. And actually, a lot of them were really, really positive things. I got engaged around about the same time. I was on various holidays. Andreas was living in Denmark. So I was like back and forth from Denmark. Like these were all really, really lovely things. But it doesn't matter how lovely the things are if there's too many of them happening all at once. If it's too much, it's too much. Whether it's nice or nasty, it's too much. So I kind of had this like snowball effect of being way too busy. My diary was way too packed with things. And in between that, I was doing emotionally a really, really, really tricky job, emotionally a very exhausting job. I also had a close family member had some health things going on, which I can't talk about because I'll cry. And I recently cried in another video, and I don't mind a little bit of crying on my channel, but I just don't want a lot of crying on my channel, you know? So we had some health scare stuff happen in my family. There was so much going on. And because I didn't have enough time in the day to do everything that I needed to get done, I basically just started sleeping less, which I know sounds so ridiculous. I mean, like when I look back, I can see that I was burning out. But honestly, at the time, I couldn't see it. And that's why even when you're a professional, you need another professional so that they can say to you, this is too much and you're going to hurt yourself, you know? Because I was just so in it that I literally couldn't see the wood for the trees. I mean, I knew that I was doing too much, but in my head, I was like, I don't have a choice. I just have to get on with it. I went on went on holiday. Yeah, I went on holiday. Oh my goodness, I totally forgot about this. I went on holiday and I really thought that 2 weeks away from work would fix everything. I really thought that's what would happen. And I came back from those 2 weeks and it hadn't helped. And that then I was even kind of more distressed about my situation because I thought, well, if 2 weeks off hasn't helped, like how much time do I need off in order to feel better? Because at this point, I was well aware that I felt pretty horrendous. And actually, at this point, I did have some self-awareness. In my head, I was going through all like the depression checks that we do at work, all the general questions you ask people. It was looking bad. It was looking really bad for me. Just things like, yeah, like no interest, no energy. My appetite had changed, feeling really disconnected, feeling weepy. It was pretty distressing realizing what score I was on a depression scale, yet I didn't do anything. I mean, at this point, I was still seeing my counselor, but I didn't do anything more. So I came back from holiday. I wasn't feeling any better. And then actually, I went on another holiday. Why did I had 2 holidays pretty close together. Lucky. Not lucky. And on my second holiday, I got a terrible, terrible ear infection. I ended up going to hospital. I was on morphine, and my ear canal closed up, and I had to have an internal dressing. The most excruciating thing I've ever experienced in my entire life. And at that point, I knew that I had done that to myself. Not to get all victim blamey, but I knew that probably wouldn't have happened if I'd been taking better care of myself. But as a result of burnout, I had made myself ill. Like when it came upon me, I remember actually being in a session with my counselor over Zoom, like whilst on holiday, and just crying and being like, I know that I've done this to myself. And oh my God, I was experiencing so much judgment that I hadn't seen what was happening before then, and that I hadn't been able to do something to help myself, like throw myself a lifeline. Because as a professional, I don't know, you put so much of my identity is held in the fact that when it comes to mental health stuff, like I know what I'm talking about. I'm really, really good at my job. But then when it came to me, the most important person in my life, the person that I have to spend, the only person that I have to spend the rest of my life with, that's the person I'm going to ignore the signs and the symptoms. Why? Why would I do that to myself? So there was like a lot of judgment wrapped up in it. It was real bad times. It was really, really bad times. So I'm going to try and keep the rest of it brief, or else the story is going to be really, really long. After that, I was pretty sure that I needed to go off work sick for my mental health. Thankfully, in Scotland, like especially when you work for the National Health Service, they're really, really good at giving you time off. So I knew that that was definitely an option. There was quite a lot of like occupational guilt wrapped up in that. I really felt like it was something that kind of like morally I wasn't entitled to. I sort of felt like maybe I was like being a bit dramatic. But again, I mean, none of those things were true. I was just feeling guilty about the situation I'd found myself in. So I went back to work to see what it was like. And I was in an appointment with a patient, and she was telling me a really sad story. I know this story. I've heard it before. In my job, every single day I hear sad stories. I am a professional secret keeper. I am often the first person to hear someone's very, very traumatic story. I have heard people say things for the first time so many times. Because I'm a therapist and a psychiatric nurse, often people will confide in you and they haven't ever said these things out loud. And they're always terrible. They're always terrible. Because in my job, I'm meeting people at the lowest point in their lives. They have to be at the lowest point in their lives to be able to access somebody in the NHS. So I was hearing this story. It was no more sad than all the other stuff that I'm used to hearing about. And I knew I was going to cry. I was right on the brink of tears. And at that point, like I really knew that I wasn't fit to be in work anymore. If I didn't have any kind of professional veil up, if I didn't have any kind of skin, any kind of like protection against the sadness that I'm exposed to, I needed to go the hell home and rest. Because that's just like, if that's the way If that's what's happening to me at work and it's completely out with my control, I'm not fit to be there anymore. At that point, I am no longer a help to the people I'm trying to help. Actually, I could become an unprofessional hindrance, honestly, because if I can't keep my emotions in check like that, then what other professional decisions am I potentially making incorrectly? So I worked in the health center where I was also registered. So I was really, really lucky that I went to one of my colleagues who's a GP, who is also my GP. And I basically cried in her room, and she said, I think that you need to go home, and I think that you need to stay at home for quite a long time. So 5 months later, 5 months later, I was still off work, but planning on going back to work. And I had had some time to think about things, and I just knew that it wasn't the right place for me to be anymore. I was dealing with too many things at home, and actually not to mention the things that were happening away from home. So at the whole same time that this is occurring, Andreas, my partner, who is also from Scotland, he took a job in Denmark. He moved over here like over 2 years ago. So we had decided in 2020 when he moved, not 2020, 2022 when he moved, that at the 2-year mark of him being in another country, we would do something to try and have us both be back in the same place as each other. When he came to work in Denmark, like, I didn't mind staying at home. I was still very much enjoying my job. Like, my family's there, my whole life is there. And we're very happy to live apart from each other. It's really like not a problem for us. So that was the decision made at the time. But at the 2-year mark, we'd probably see what else we could do, because certainly the long distance on your relationship, doing long distance for 2 years, it did cause strain at some point. I mean, I think most people can understand that long distance is just it's tricky. It's really tricky when you're living quite separate lives, or at least more separate than you want them to be. So we are at December last year. I went back to work, but I went back to work knowing I was only going to be there for sort of 9 months. I decided the 9 months would give me a really good amount of time to finish up with the patients that I still had on my caseload, to really like conclude things quite nicely. And then at that point, I would have the freedom to be able to move back and forth from Denmark a bit more. So also during this whole time, I was doing private therapeutic work. So my private therapy service, like, it's really small. I don't have many clients. I didn't have many clients whilst I was also working for the NHS. But I knew that when I was going between Denmark and home, that I would still be able to see them. So that would provide me with like a little bit of work. And that's when I started to concoct the idea of maybe starting a YouTube channel. I really still want to work in mental health, but I knew at that point I kind of needed to find a way for it to work for me, because trying to like cram myself into this typical psychiatric nurse role, it just wasn't working for me anymore. Not really healthy for me, at least for the time being. But I still really want to carry on telling people about how they can take better care of themselves. So I'm here talking about myself into a camera. There's a couple of things that I need to like return to in the story. So the fact that I was able to take 5 months off from work, fully paid, by the way, was absolutely astonishing. Like, that's one thing that Scotland in general is amazing for sick leave, especially when you work for the NHS. You maybe don't get paid a lot, but they do really make an effort to take care of you in other ways. And I was so incredibly grateful for that, because it gave me the opportunity to actually have time to process what had been happening. I had time to finish up a lot of stuff in my life that had felt really overwhelming. And I was then able to really assess what I wanted to do next, rather than maybe just walking away from the job because I didn't have the time to make a decision. So yeah, that's what happened. Sick leave was weird. Sick leave was really, really weird. I might even do I'm going to do a whole video at some point just about what it's like to be on sick leave for your mental health. Odd. Really odd. Really, really odd. Especially when you're a professional. Like, most days I would wake up when I was like at my absolute lowest and things like, yeah, and things just felt so dark. And I'm not gonna cry. And I would really just think, how did I get here? Like, I don't quite know how this happened to me. And that was really, really scary. And I think that I think it is really frightening when you find that happening to yourself. You feel quite alien to yourself and things feel out with your control. And I think that question of like, why is probably one that a lot of people experience. So that is my story time. Since then, I have taken very, very good care of myself. It was tricky going back to work, but also it was tricky leaving. Like, it was really tricky leaving for good. I knew it was the most important thing for my health, but when you're a nurse, like, it's a huge part of your identity, and letting go of that and then just being like a person. I mean, I still describe myself as a psychiatric nurse, but when you're not actually practicing, it is a really, really strange thing to let go of. I realized while I was trying to process all of that there is quite a lot of like, it's a status. There's kind of an ego attached to it. I was nursing for over 10 years, and it's something that I know I'm really good at, and I helped a lot of people. So there was a lot to unpack there, kind of guilt about leaving and guilt about leaving a service which I loved providing. I loved being part of my team there. It was, yeah, it felt like a lot to give up, but it also felt really, really, really necessary. So please leave a comment if you can relate to, I mean, just any part of this. I realized there was a lot of information in a short amount of time. I still cannot see literally what I've been recording. So I hope all of this like looked okay and that there was nothing weird going on me, behind me. I don't know. I'm used to being able to like have some visual reference to what I'm actually recording. So fingers crossed it all looked okay. Please like and subscribe if you aren't already. And yeah, I'll see you guys in my next video. You take good care. Bye.